Good morning. Thank you all for tuning in to One World. This morning, I'm going to continue with my talk from 2 weeks ago about prophecy in the modern age by taking a look at the path of the prophet. Last time, I presented what I think are the characteristics of today's political prophets, the necessity for activist prophets who are more in tune with the sacredness of humanity and the earth, and why it is so important for us to be willing to answer the call of the activist prophet. Today, I'm going to talk about prophetic spirituality, the term Sister Joan Chittister uses to name the process by which we create sacred space within ourselves, a space where love and compassion can take root and flower in an outward expression. But first, I want to take just a few minutes to talk about how we can determine who is and who is not a true prophet. Who should we listen to? And who can we trust? As mentioned before, the ancient prophets were concerned with establishing the belief in and worship of one God, in eliminating idolatry, and in instituting a moral code for their people. They spoke out against justice and exploitation. Contemporary prophets also respond to the unfair and excessive realities of the world around us, and they too speak out about injustice and exploitation. However, no matter how farsighted or accurate they are, no prophet can predict the future for certain. Yet, true prophets of any age are able to see what is clearly in front of them. Unless and until society changes, humanity as a whole will suffer. Two key elements of prophecy are wisdom and discernment. Wisdom is a divine gift, one that we develop through both knowledge and experience. Yet often we mistake knowledge for wisdom and then trust so much in the surety of our own knowledge that we override or dismiss messages of that require a measure of faith, even those that come to us from the same divine source as wisdom. That is why discernment, our perception of true spiritual guidance and understanding, is so important. In her personal observations, Sister Joan has seen that people's spiritual lives are in such disorder that we are no longer listening for those messages that come directly from Source. However, when we get our spiritual lives back in order through contemplative prayer, meditation, and study, we are able to once again listen for divine guidance. Spirit can once again reveal to us what is true. And when that revelation comes to us through another person in a direct way, it is part of what the biblical authors meant by prophecy. Today, there are oracular voices on almost every issue, sometimes on both sides of every issue. So, how do we know which voices to listen to? And how do we trust our own perception of truth? How can we judge true prophets from false and discern the path of prophetic spirituality for ourselves? The Reverend Thomas Reese is a Jesuit priest and senior analyst at Religion News Service, a nonprofit media organization that provides non-sectarian news and commentary. He offers 4 ways to tell a true prophet from a political puppet. First, he says, follow the money. No prophet in the scriptures was ever rich. What did you go out to the desert to see? Jesus asked John the Baptist. Someone dressed in fine garments. Those who dress luxuriously and live sumptuously are found in royal palaces. In other words, a true prophet does not get rich speaking for God. Second, ask yourself, who are the prophet's friends? A true prophet is friends with the poor and the powerless. A false prophet keeps company with the rich and powerful. Put no trust in princes, says the speaker in Psalm 146. Prophets should not get in bed with politicians. Third, for whom does the prophet speak? The job of the prophet is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. False prophets tell their congregations what they want to hear. A prophet who ignores the sins of his friends is a prophet for the powerful, not for God. And lastly, how does he or she speak? The words of a prophet can ring with righteous anger, but not with hate. The prophet must condemn exploitation, but have compassion for sinners. If there is no love in the prophet's voice, then that one does not speak with the voice of God. The true prophet speaks only after listening and praying. The prophets of our time, like the biblical prophets before us, know that peace is essential. They believe justice is achievable and refuse to be silent. They do not come to condemn those who think differently about a thing. They come to warn, to persuade, to enlighten, and they do not come to win by any means available. Prophet's call is to unite the world in an honest understanding of the sacredness of the earth and its people. Activists with a prophet's heart do not lead militant armies. They lead compassionate hearts and thoughtful minds. Prophetic spirituality is an attitude of soul. It is not a set of spiritual practices or a collection of dogmas. The person with the soul of a prophet sees what the rest of the world cannot see or does not want to see, and uses that vision as a compass through life. But each one of us must do more than criticize and denounce what we don't like. Be more than bystanders cheering the messenger. We must teach the truth, the why of injustice, the downsides of present practices and circumstances, as well as their spiritual and social implications. We must encourage and sustain what is working and repair or replace what is not. And so we come to a crossroad. Do we suffer the status quo to continue and thereby perhaps risk the future of our children and our world? Or do we find the faith and courage to step out on the path of the prophet? From Amos to Moses, from Jesus to Joan of Arc, to more examples than I have time to mention, we can find many instances throughout history of people who chose to accept the role and responsibility of being a prophet to their people. Yet, one example I do want to recall today is an activist named Daniel Barrigan. Maybe some of you will recall Father Barrigan, an American Jesuit priest, poet, author, Christian pacifist, and anti-war activist. Father Barrigan was ordained a priest in 1952 and began traveling in France, where he was influenced by the worker priest movement. Upon his return to the United States, he started teaching in universities such as Yale and Cornell. He also wrote poetry, which became a way to express his growing concerns about American war making. During those years, he became friends with social activists like Dorothy Day, Thomas Merton, and William Stringfellow. Daniel Barrigan's adult life was punctuated with bold acts of nonviolent social action. He marched with his friend Reverend Martin Luther King in Selma, Alabama. During the 60s, when the United States was tearing itself apart over civil rights and the war in Southeast Asia, he was emerging as an intellectual star of the Catholic Church and a champion of the view that racism and poverty, militarism and capitalist greed were interconnected pieces of the same big problem, an unjust society. He and his brother Philip, a decorated hero of World War II turned activist priest, took their case from the classroom to the streets, with rising disregard for the law or their personal safety. In the minds of a great many Americans, Father Barrigan was a radical traitor, yet for many others he exemplified ultra-resistance to war and militarism. Father Barrigan reached a defining point during the Vietnam War, 6 weeks after the murder of his friend Reverend King and the outbreak of riots in dozens of American cities. 9 activists, led by Daniel and Philip Barrigan, seized hundreds of draft records and set them on fire with homemade napalm. The subsequent trial of the so-called Catonsville Nine inspired an escalation of protests across the country. There were marches, sit-ins, draft card burnings, and other acts of civil disobedience. Barrigan was tried and sentenced to 3 years in prison. He refused to surrender himself and went underground for several months, living with supporters and surfacing periodically at anti-war rallies. Listed on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted calendar, he eventually was apprehended and spent 18 months in prison. Over the years, until well into his 80s, Father Barrigan participated in many more demonstrations, including protesting the Gulf War, the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan, and the Iraq War. He was arrested time and again for greater or lesser offenses, and altogether, he spent a total of nearly 7 years in prison. In addition to his public activism, Father Barrigan had a long career of writing and teaching at Fordham and other universities, where he published an abundance of activist essays, poems, and, on average, a book a year for a total of 50 books. And while he was known for his wry wit, there was a darkness in much of what Father Barrigan wrote, the gist of which was that one had to keep trying to do the right thing, regardless of this near certainty that it would make no difference. What made it bearable, he said, was a belief in God as the key to sanity and survival. There's so much more that can be said about Daniel Barrigan, who, when asked on his 80th birthday how long he planned to go on, replied, "The day after I'm embalmed, that's when I'll give up." Father Barrigan understood the role of the prophet, saying, "The prophet is one who speaks the truth in a culture of lies." And he willingly accepted the consequences of answering the call to walk the path of prophecy. About his life, Father Barrigan once wrote, "I lost my aura. More grievously, I lost a home. Henceforth, I would be a wanderer on the earth, here and there, an overnight dwelling." Father Daniel Barrigan's long life ended in 2016 at the age of 94. He was a prophet in our times. Now, we can't all be like Father Barrigan. However, taking the path of prophetic spirituality can teach, motivate, and prod every one of us to do more, to do better, to be better. But how can busy people with family and lives to live possibly take on the additional work of social activism? According to Sister Joan, it helps to be aware of some common ways prophecy is expressed by folks like us, and to have confidence in both the big and little ways of responding to prophetic messages. Here are some key points from Sister Joan to consider. Number 1, to be spiritually mature, we must each be about something greater than ourselves. To own the implications of prophetic spirituality, we must think beyond our own small world to the effects everyday issues have on our communities and make a response to them, with others or alone. Prophetic spirituality requires us to think about and study causes as well as consequences. We refuse to take news reports, rumors, and unconfirmed information as the whole truth and begin to look for real answers instead. And number 3, today's prophets identify with the issues. They become lay experts on the questions and concerns of the people and communities of whom they come in contact. They cry out for action, as did the prophets of old. And 4, people who understand the place of prophetic spirituality in progressive activism speak out and spread the word too, so that others become comfortable and knowledgeable about the issues. Number 5, prophetic spirituality leads us to recognize our own role as messengers. Today's prophets take it as their responsibility to help others understand what is going on so we can all act together. 6, the people who recognize the richness of prophetic spirituality are willing to change their own lives and habits, at least in small ways. And 7, spiritual prophets become the messengers of divine justice for the poor and the oppressed by writing about it, speaking about it, and leading discussion about current issues and problems. Number 8, spiritual activists today are advocates for groups of new Americans and encourage them to talk about their lives and hopes and dreams. They create a solid connection between old and new that promotes acceptance and prevents barriers that emphasize difference. And finally, number 9, prophetic spirituality requires us to stop hiding behind a life of prayer as an excuse to do nothing about anything. Prophetic spirituality can be a difficult charismatic gift to understand. The key is to combine daily prayer with a humble obedience to the prophetic word that God has chosen to reveal to us. And I believe that word is being spoken. It's being shouted out by social activists like Daniel Barrigan and Philip Barrigan, Marianne Williamson, Bill Gates, Mirabai Starr, and so many others, the prophets of our own time. I'm wrapping up today's talk with a story I read in the book American Prophets, written by national religion reporter Jack Jenkins. Jenkins was listening to a speech by Cory Booker at a memorial for 9 parishioners who were shot and killed in the 2015 Mother Emanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina. This is the story from Jenkins' perspective, and he writes, I looked over my shoulder and noticed a small group of men. I walked over and asked if any of them had listened to the speech. Only one said yes, a man named Melvin Graham. Awkward at first, he explained that not only was he a member of the church, but he also that he'd lost his sister, Cynthia Graham Hurd, in the shooting. I asked him if he appreciated Booker's references to faith. He offered an enthusiastic yes, insisting that he found spiritual resonance in the senator's activism-minded approach to religion. And then his voice began to waver. We don't want thoughts and prayers anymore, he said, his eyes welling with tears. We want action. God is good. God is great. God can do all things. But God gave us the power to do something on our own, to do some things and use that power. Use that authority he's given you to make things better. Take those talents he's given you and don't bury them in the sand. Use them for good, for justice. Power is not ours to hold on to. Power is there for us to help people, to uplift people. Mr. Graham steadied himself. Then he added a fiery addendum, his voice thick with indignant pain that comes with loss. And unless the politicians decide to do what is morally right and not what is politically expedient for themselves, this will continue. We have lost the holy gift of awareness of the world's needs that the prophets before us brought to our attention. We have overlooked what they came to teach us, that the time most relevant to atonement and renewal is right now. And we have ignored, forgotten, or given away our power to be the change we want to see. But we can no longer leave the work of sanctification to others. This is for us, each and every one of us, to do. Eldress Antoinette Doolittle of the Shaker faith said, "Every cycle has its prophets as guiding stars, and they are the burning candles of God to light the spiritual temple on earth for the time being. When they have done their work, they will pass away, but the candlesticks will remain, and other light will be placed in them. We are the candles of today. It is up to each of us to provide the light, be it a tiny little spark or a blazing bonfire that will grow into a guiding light for those who walk the path of the prophets." I began 2 weeks ago with Sister Joan, and so I'll end today with her as well. She writes, "What we do and say, see and respond to in our own day is the path laid before us. It is the times we live in that are our call to courage. There is no doubt about it. The purpose of prophecy is to awaken the world, to bring humanity closer to the reign of God, one small step at a time. The quality of life we create around us is meant to create new life, new hope, new dynamism, the very essence of a new world community. That is the path of prophecy." And so it is. Thank you, and good day.